air and transportation needs too?
Now, Mr. Weissmuller, here's an opportunity, a question that has to be asked from this Rules Committee. The article from the San Diego Union Tribune with regards to the PO-PICO approval of a gas plant. Obviously, this comes in light of the closure, or at that time, perhaps in anticipation of the closure of SONG's, the San Onofre nuclear plant, which now obviously has been closed and will be mothballed. The article alleges inappropriate communication with the then, chair of the California Public Utilities Commission. This is an opportunity for you to give us your perspective, your response to this article, and if you believe that the communication between you and then chair of the CPUC was appropriate. So why don't you give us an opportunity, here's an opportunity for you to address this issue by an article by the San Diego Union Tribune, specifically again on SONG's and alleged inappropriate communications.
Oh, no. Thank you very much for that opportunity. I'm going to cover it in 3 parts. I'm going to talk a little bit about context, then the specific action, and then looking backwards on reflection. So first, to remind everyone at that time, when I first came on the commission, we were getting little Hoover Commission suggestions that we, the PUC, the Air Board, and Cal ISO work together much better than we were. And frankly, when San Onofre went down, we were really forced to work together very closely. I mean, as you know, the whole transmission system in Southern California was designed around San Onofre always being there. And once it went down, we were scrambling in that early year or so to try to get some resources in place. And one of the things that I had to deal with, I am the state's representative, safety liaison with the NRC. And so I was meeting with Southern California Edison, I was meeting with NRC staff, I was meeting with concerned citizens, trying to figure out what was wrong with the plant, and whether it would ever return to operation, or at least whether it could be operated safely. And so in that context, when we had just had that major outage in Southern California, which turned out to be different things, but it certainly gave all of us some degree of pause. And so at that point, I was really concerned about how to keep the lights on. That certainly was my charge from the governor, was to keep the lights on at that stage. And so we had permitted at the Energy Commission the PO-PICO plant. We also had pending before us Quailbush. And Quailbush was very controversial. Obviously, I did not think ultimately that was going to happen. And so there I was, and I read a PUC draft decision that turned down PO-PICO, but basically assumed San Onofre was always going to be there. And by that point, I had real doubts about whether the plant would ever come back up. So I was at a UC Davis meeting on energy efficiency with President Peavy, and I expressed concerns with him about the decision, and I expressed concerns about San Onofre and that linkage between the two. And what he suggested was that I write a letter to, basically it would go to all the commissioners, it would go on the record of the case, everyone could respond to it, and you could lay out my arguments. I think you... To the PUC commissioners. To all the PUC commissioners, but also to everyone who was an active participant in PO-PICO. And I did that letter, and at that point, you might ask the question, why did you do a letter? Well, in fact, the prior month, one of our San Onofre issues was pending at FERC. And FERC? Federal Energy Regulatory. Yeah, no, I just want to say the acronym for the colleagues, yeah. And so, in the course of about a week, Assemblyman Bradford wrote a letter, the governor wrote a letter, the chair and vice chair of the Senate Energy Committee wrote a letter, President Peavy wrote a letter, and I wrote a letter. So it was there's a very complicated FERC proceeding, but we all sent letters expressing our concerns. So I assume that's how the whole concept came up in a way. But at the same time, at least it meant that it was on the record and people could react to it. Now, in terms of what happened after I sent the letter in, actually the the PUC gave everyone the opportunity to comment. Ultimately, the ALJ and presiding commissioner decided not to accept the letter for the record, so it never went in the record. And then several months later, the PUC voted to turn down Pio Pico 5-0. Now, having said that, once Edison announced that San Onofre was not coming back up, at that stage, SDG&E resubmitted the application, and the PUC ultimately approved it 5-0. I had no letter, no involvement in that second case. So in terms of, I guess my letter, if anything, it certainly alerted PV to the question. But having said that, as I said, it was not in the record. Certainly everyone in the public had a chance to respond to it, and it certainly did not influence the commission's decision at that time, as far as I can tell. In terms of looking back on it today, obviously we're in a much different climate now. In terms of the PUC is really, the crisis of confidence. And, I have no personal knowledge of, say, the Brian Cherry back and forth with Mike Peavy. But at the same time, I think all of us have been shaken. And at this point, my concern is, one of my concerns watching what's happening at the PUC is obviously to make sure that the Energy Commission retains public confidence. And, at the same time, it's President Picker's problem of trying to make sure that the PUC regains confidence. But again, it's at a stage now, I certainly have to think about whether I'd ever write a letter again to the PUC. But, at least at that point in that context, it seemed the right thing to do, and certainly it was public. It wasn't just me calling 5 commissioners expressing concerns. Okay.
All right. Anything else you want to add?
No, I'm happy to, happy to answer any questions from anyone on that issue.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Weisenmiller. What we're going to do right now is we're going to open it to questions or commentaries from the members of the Rules Committee. Mr. Cannella?
No.
Yeah?
Thank you. I had a chance to meet with you yesterday for some time, and I appreciated that meeting, but I find it interesting about this letter situation, and apparently it's caused some concern, but the LAO report that indicated, there was an LAO report that indicated that a lack of coordination between the PUC, the CEC, and the ISO, and there was no comprehensive strategy for achieving our energy efficiency objectives. So it seems like if you write them a letter, you're trying to coordinate and work together. So now you're concerned about working together. So how are these big agencies going to work together if you can't write a letter, or you can't call them, and you can't talk? Just
communicate, sign language.
No communicate, yeah. I'm concerned. You guys, these are important decisions. So now if you're concerned about writing a letter that the public has access to, how will you coordinate?
Yeah, no, that's the fundamental challenge. Like I said, is on the one hand, the Energy Commission staff, the Energy Commission, when I was here the first time, we actually intervened in PUC cases. We clashed pretty hard at times with them. At this point, we were, quote unquote, in a collaborative role. So if they look to my staff as a resource, they can use it. For example, in the area of smart inverters, President Picker asked, or at that point, Sloyo asked us to help them, and we did. But, so like I said, I'm struggling with trying to find the right balance of making sure that we are cooperating, we're communicating, and also, frankly, where there's a litigated issue at the PUC, typically we're not in the middle of the litigated issue. So, again, I'm trying to strike that balance. Any guidance the committee can give me, or, certainly others, but yeah, we do have to work together, and just trying to figure out how to effectively do that at the same time of trying to make sure the public is comfortable that the decisions of both agencies are based upon the records in those cases, and they're before us.
Okay, well, it seems like, again, I want more coordination, not less coordination, so we've got some big challenges before us. So, we had a nice discussion about electric vehicles, zero-emission vehicles. I know we'd like to talk about that, and I think that's a great strategy in the state of California, but the problem is that the people who live in my district can't afford them. So we've got the wealthy that are driving these really nice cars, and they're getting great rebates from the state and federal government. What can we do to make them more affordable for middle class and lower income folks that really drive more and probably need them? So, what kind of strategies I know Senator De Leon talks. Prop 25? Yeah. The senator's been a great advocate, very outspoken advocate for getting them to a larger group of people, but it seems like a big challenge.
It's a big challenge, and frankly, we're not going to meet our goals unless we can move these from the early adapters, who, let's face it, most early adapters are pretty wealthy. We've got to move these into the mainstream. And the question is, can they really bring the cost down to do that, but at the same time, enough to do that? I mean, certainly there will be more used vehicles, but again, for this to really work, we have to move this into this has to be mainstream. And, we are working, like I said, if we can figure out ways to have electric buses out there, if we can figure out ways to do goods movement in Southern California with low-emission vehicles of some sort, again, that's going to help. But that is the fundamental problem. And our hope, obviously, is that with that signal from the state that we are going to reduce our petroleum use, that this is an opportunity, that's going to bring in the entrepreneurs, the innovators, who will figure out ways to keep driving those costs down. Because we have to drive them down, presumably by getting to scale, but we need, we need better batteries. We need a whole slew of things to really move those out to the mainstream customer, where, in your district, this has got to become part of their life too. Is that we're trying to get the infrastructure out, but again, we have to be thinking big about how to make this transformation occur in transportation and how to move these from the great, very expensive cars, but to mainstream. We're struggling, frankly.
I'm for mass transit. I think mass transit is one solution, but when you represent a rural area, you can't build enough buses to get people to where they need to go. So you're, it seems like you care about that as well. You're looking for solutions. I think that's got to be a big priority for the state. If we're going to hit any of these goals, we've got to target the lower income folks because they're the ones that have not a lot of options. So
yeah, no, and again, I mean, that's for all of our preferred technologies, frankly. I mean, again, a lot of these are right now early adapters, for the photovoltaics on the roofs, good credit ratings, everything else, but we have to get to mainstream. Yeah. And that's actually one of the reasons why I'm as passionate as I am about our sort of AB 758 report on retrofitting existing buildings, and certainly that part of the governor's goal. As you know, most of our low-income people live in rented buildings. Yeah. And there's no incentives for the landlord or for them to really retrofit. So that's a very tough nut to crack. We haven't succeeded in 30 years, but to really get the energy efficiency savings we need and to help all of our citizens, we really have to move the needle in existing rented space.
Okay. I have no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cannella. And I think Mr. Cannella and Mr. Weisenmiller brings up some really salient points with regards to the current stock of electrical vehicles. But we have come a long way in the past 10 years. We have 150,000 electrical vehicles on the roads, which is a good thing. But by far and large, to highlight what Mr. Cannella says, they are out of reach for many working class families, for even middle income families. So I think it's really critical that we still move forward and build upon 1275 and other policy measures that are very similar that really incentivize, if you will. One thing I want to add just something that's constructive, what CEC or CARB, with 1275, the goal, the objective is to make sure that low-income families, whether they're rural, whether they're urban areas, low-income families have access to rebates that would incentivize them, along with a federal tax credit, to possibly get into a ZEV, understanding and knowing that these are the added benefits to you on an annual basis because your consumption for fossil fuels is non-existent because obviously you don't have to spend money. However, it's one thing passing legislation, it's one thing CARB and CEC, and another thing is the community and the people. Having a link, having information on the website where 99.9% of this universe does not go on to the CARB website, does not go on to CEC website. It's absolutely critical that we work with the manufacturers, that we deal with the dealers. We have to work with the dealers because, it's one of those, the old adage, if the the tree falls in the middle of the forest and you're not there to see it, hear it, witness it, did it really fall? We passed some significant legislation. We got to make sure that those rebates are in fact used, that are expended, that folks need to bundle it up together. We will have the policy debates whether we actually have to have more value in the rebates for this constituency. But Mr. Cannell is absolutely correct. We have to make sure that we can get these vehicles, and whether it's in series, you know, in the San Joaquin Valley or urban areas, you know, like Boyle Heights and South LA, East Oakland and East San Jose and elsewhere, absolutely critical. So everyone should be able to have an opportunity to participate. And why this is actually really critical, because it goes again with the debate, the internal debate with regards to Prop 94 and the whole per capita debate. If you're a coastal resident, you have that financial wherewithal, you know, to purchase a ZEV, you know, whether it's a Tesla, and then you draw down on that rebate. So kind of like, you know, we don't know policy-wise that that's the most fiscally prudent thing to do. But in terms of how you measure and quantify, you know, CO2 emissions, most likely someone who lives in San Joaquin Valley or in an urban environment is driving a vehicle that's much older. And because it's much older, the emissions are incredibly higher. Therefore, when you actually, it's not a good feel, sort of noblesse oblige, kind of like we feel good because we're helping the poor. It actually makes sense because these are folks who are actually emitting higher amounts of CO2 in some cases because of the cars that they're driving. Obviously, in some instances, they're driving a truck because they're gardeners, you know, or they're going to construction, you know. So it's a different dynamic, you know. But once folks feel that, oh my God, I can actually get this amount of savings on an annual basis, I'm not paying in terms of gasoline prices, you know, weaning folks off the dependency on fossil fuels, I think that we will hit a home run. So I think it's really important that CEC, along with CARB, and I know you don't represent CARB, and we'll speak with Mary Nichols separate, is that we can't get stuck here, but we really got to go down here, you know. And I think the dealers are going to be play a pivotal role in terms of turning on the consumer once they walk onto the lot. If that connection is not there, then we're going to have all these rebates sort of kind of tucked off, you know, on a shelf, and then we have a link on the website, and you report to us that we got a website, we got a link, and no one actually has gone to the website at all whatsoever of the consumer base that we're concerned about, so we can get that rebate in their hands. So then once that happens, I got a feeling that it's just going to hit a tipping point where a lot of folks are going to really be highly interested.
No, I agree. I think, again, speaking for myself, I think the notion of having rebates as opposed to credits, I mean, that's huge for peaks, folks. One of the things I am doing at least is we have an advisory board for our AB8 program, and I've convinced Greenlining to join that board, and certainly looking for similar representations from Southern California. As it is now, we have obviously a lot of industrial folks there talking about how we can help in these industries, but I want to make sure that we have that sort of representation on that board, helping us decide where to invest those monies.
Fantastic. Okay, next member, that will be Senator Holly Mitchell.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Kind of in keeping with my colleague's question, you know, focusing on working class Californians and recognizing the impact of the closure of San Onofre and the Diablo Canyon little earthquake fault situation, you know, coupled with the clear growing need that the state, particularly Southern California, is going to have for power. I guess it goes back to kind of the age-old question in terms of who's going to pay for it, and what the CEC is going to do to really protect economically disenfranchised communities from having to bear a disproportionate burden of that cost.
Sure.
And is there a role the CEC can play in doing that?
Well, I mean, what we can do is we do research and development. We do building standards and appliance standards. And again, we're trying to come up with a plan to reach out to existing buildings. You know, we've got 10 million. So certainly I'm trying to make sure our research dollars are For example, how do we make sure that we're really looking at multifamily housing?
Right.
You know, and coming up with energy efficiency options there, as opposed to coming up with things that may help the early adapters to do all kinds of combinations of really nice technology. But I want to make sure that we are we're really looking at options that, again, are more, and for the more disadvantaged in a research program. And again, that's something where, and we're also, I've been very clear to the staff, I want to have workshops where, that everyone can understand how to apply for our programs. Now, the good or bad news from my perspective is I don't really set utility rates. And,
Right.
it's
Right.
sort of one of the.
And so, if I'm asking you, within your lane, I'm not.
Within my
your
lane.
What can you do?
And, and actually one of the things that we do that help people a lot is appliance standards. We are preempted from some from the federal government, but again, if we're making sure that people have available to them to buy, we often see these things are the same cost. And we're trying to get the inefficient stuff off the markets to make sure people aren't dumping inefficient products, in the disadvantaged communities. So that helps get the bills, helps your folks get their bills down, and similarly, we're trying to make sure buildings are built good from the start. And again, that's really important. But a thing I'm really struggling with is to make sure we can figure out a way to address, like I said, rented housing. We have over 10 million houses, and most of that's rented.
That's right.
And
Or multifamily.
And multifamily.
Right.
And again, we need to figure out programs and again, we've got a draft on that, and that's certainly one of the bigger challenges the governor has framed for me, is saying, okay, how do we cut building use down, energy use in buildings? And like I said, it's easy if you're talking about someone who's wealthy living in their own house, and, they can look at options, they can make what's economically advantageous investments, or maybe someone will lease those to them. But again, we need a program. One of the ideas we're there is right now we have all these smart meters. They have all data on usage, but to make sure that everyone gets sort of a periodic report card on what you could do. I mean, we have very smart programs, computer program. Now, I don't need to send someone out with a clipboard to walk through someone's house, but, I want to get to the stage where people have up with their options. Although, frankly, again, I'd like to make sure that we're really targeting, this sort of, what's the biggest bang for buck we can do there?
Right.
It's not, here's your $15,000 or your $30,000, do all the stuff energy efficiency wise, add the solar system, add maybe storage system. But, can we get a big bang for your buck for $500 program? So anyway, that's right. There are limits, but we're really trying to focus. So again, like I said, it's very important as we move into this whole new clean technology area, that we're making sure everyone can participate in some fashion.
Excellent. I'm glad to hear that you're thinking about that. Moving on, if I may, to some opposition that I've heard from advocates across the state, not necessarily district specific, but across the state, and kind of the more global statement really being that there's a concern that there's no one on the commission that's really appropriately committed to clean energy. And then more specifically, with regard to you, a concern that you've been too supportive of gas-fired plants and haven't exhibited or haven't kind of transitioned your thinking or your commitment to clean energy, particularly considering how rapidly the technology is advancing. So I'd just like to hear your general kind of response to that sense, that feeling.
Well, again, this is time to look at performance. So, I mean, first of all, I have sort of a dream team of commissioners. I mean, frankly, they're all hearts, mind, and passion is dealing, with climate change, greenhouse gases, clean technology. And myself included. Again, there's certainly, this is sort of at a stage where I've helped the governor, as I said, develop the most aggressive goals for greenhouse gas reductions, for clean technology in the in North America. And again, you saw all the acclaim there. So
why do you think that perception persist?
Well, when we were looking at San Onofre, replacement, I mean, obviously some of the advocates say, gee, you should do 100% renewables. You should do 100% preferred technologies.
Right.
And, and frankly, I didn't think the technology was there then or now to do 100%. So I'm looking at, what I've been really charged with is to keep the reliable power, try to keep cost reasonable, and at the same time, get greenhouse gas emissions down, get clean technology out. So I guess what I'm saying, I go back to the first Brown administration in terms of his, helping him develop his initial energy policy and making sure California did not make commitments at that stage to coal and nuclear. So again, I'm not going to, I have sort of at this point in my life, I've sort of worked with banks, I've worked with the business community, and so I sort of understand the idea of a balanced portfolio, and frankly see a role for gas, but I basically would anticipate, we're going to build a lot of renewables. We're not going to get to the greenhouse gas goals of the governor unless we, do a lot of energy efficiency, do a lot of renewables, get a lot of electric vehicles out there, a lot of clean, And so the question is, was our gas use going to be more or less if we make the plants more flexible? And so replace some of these old Lyndon Johnson era plants that, frankly, you have to keep on all the time.
Right.
At a pretty inefficient, pretty dirty basis. And so my premise is that if we can make them more flexible, we're actually, we're going to keep the lights on, we're going to keep costs down, but we're also going to allow more renewable development. So again, you saw the letter from NRDC talking about how my lifetime work has really been in the area of clean technology, energy efficiency. I mean, again, Brown won. I mean, we got renewables started, really, in the state. We got energy efficiency started. I can't say I'm so again, but I'm balanced, I guess what I'm saying. I'm not.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough. One last question. California continues to be pretty heavily dependent on natural gas. And given that, I am curious about how you think we get to the governor's greenhouse gas emissions reductions without reducing the burning of natural gas. So that's kind of an aside.
No, we're going to reduce the burning of natural gas.
Just period.
Period. We have a cap and trade program.
Right.
Cap and trade says this is the most you can do. Over the longer term, the natural gas plants, like I said, have to become more nimble. They have to become more flexible because they operate less. But I want to make sure that if the wind has stopped blowing or the sun has set, and say we have a transmission line goes out, we've got some way. Now, again, we're moving storage along. Energy Commission has done a lot of research on storage. We've done a lot of research on demand response. We've worked with ISO and the PUC. We now have roadmaps for what each of us need to do. But again, my role, in this area is we do very vigorous standards for buildings and appliances. We do site power plants, and there's a pretty extensive law on exactly what we have to consider going through those, and we follow the law on that. But again, you're going to see much less natural gas. And frankly, when you get to natural gas, two of the basic concerns that we have to deal with is, number one, fugitive emissions. Methane is a very potent greenhouse gas source. We need to make sure that the Air Board is developing regulations, but we need to make sure that those emissions are really, really limited, and they can also have safety implications. I mean, if you've got a leaky gas pipeline system in your neighborhood, that can cause problems. So again, natural gas has the challenge, one, of we have to make sure that, and the EDF has done a wonderful job of really pushing the science. We're trying to push the science to understand what's the actual leakage, how do we get that down? And it shouldn't be too hard, right? Or pipes to tighten them or whatever. But we also, it's really critical on safety. I mean, we cannot have another San Bruno.
No, we cannot.
I mean, one was far too much as it was. And so those are challenges for the natural gas industry, both of them.